there. This is Ron Gula with episode 5 of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Today, we are joined by Sid Meier and Deb Tillett. Sid is famous for a huge number of things, but I'm just going to say that he's one of the reasons I got into computer programming. We're going to talk about his journey creating some of the best video games that are out there. And Deb Tillett also joins us. Deb runs the ETC. Deb, is it a foundation? Is it a
It's a
group?
nonprofit. It's a 501c3, and it's a venture of the Baltimore Development Corporation. So they set us up in the mid 90s. I wasn't working there yet. I was still working with Sid, and pretty prescient as they saw the tech, growing here in town.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Sid, how's it going? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. We are enjoying these interesting times and making the best of it.
Every day is better than the next day, right? Sid, can you tell us a little bit about your origin story? How did you get involved with writing some of the most iconic video games that are out there? How did you get started, just as an entrepreneur?
And Sid, the one thing I told Ron earlier, I said I wasn't going to weigh in, but I really think you need to tell the you and Bill Staley, was it Vegas story when you beat him at the game and he didn't like it, he couldn't figure it out.
Sure. So I've always been interested in games. I mean, even as a kid, I would play games. When I went to college, it was just in the very early days of computers, and I was a math and science guy, and computers just seemed like a natural thing to learn about. So I studied computers in college. These were the huge mainframes, and we would submit our decks of punch cards and hope that they worked. And there's nothing gamey about it. But shortly after college, I got kind of one of the first personal computers, the Atari 800, and was able to combine two things that I really enjoyed: computers and games. In the very, very early days of computer gaming, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, those kind of things, I made my own copy of Space Invaders, made my own copy of Pac-Man, in the tradition of being inspired by other games. Then shortly after that, I met Bill Staley. Bill and I ended up founding Microprose. And we met in Las Vegas we both worked for the same company. I was doing systems analysis and he was doing business development. And we were in kind of a boring meeting about future strategy or something. And we happened to start talking, and, he said, what do you do? Well, I like to play games. I'm working on some games, and asked him what he did. And he was a fighter pilot. And, he basically said, hey, we should start a company. And I said, well, okay, why not? We wandered around Las Vegas for a while after the session was over. We ended up, I think at the MGM Grand, they had kind of a basement full of different arcade games. And one of them was Red Baron, which was a World War I flying game. And he sat down, young man, let me show you how this is done here. Grabbed the joystick, put it in his quarter, and flew around and shot down a couple of airplanes. And then he asked me if I wanted to give it a try. I was like, oh, well, all right, I'll give it a try. So I sat down, put in my quarter, and my score was like 5 times his score. And he said, like, Sid, I'm a fighter pilot. I know how to do this stuff, this flying stuff. How could you beat me? I said, well, Bill, I'm a programmer, and I could tell by watching the game, what the algorithms were, how to win the game. And so I did. And he said, hey, you're a pretty smart guy. Maybe, this company is going to go somewhere. And I said, Bill, you're a pretty outgoing guy, and maybe we will do something with it. And that became the genesis of Microprose.
And Sid, and you can, again, another story, but in the beginning, weren't you just using baggies and shoving discs into the baggies and trying to get them sold?
Things have come a long way.
A long way. And wasn't the famous Bill story where he got everybody to call up like Radio Shack and say, do you have F-15 fighter pilot? And they'd be like, no. And then a couple of days later, he would go in and say, hey, I've got this game called, F-15 Fighter Pilot, and they'd buy it right up.
That was Bill. That was him calling for it. He
Oh,
would
right. He
be the
would call
caller.
him.
He would call one of these mom and pop computer game shops and say, "Hey, have you got this game?" And then a couple of days later, he'd show up
And try and
bringing the
sell
game
him the
that
game.
everybody was asking about. But yeah, it was a very different time. Our first games, I would duplicate the discs on my own disk drive, print out the manuals on my Epson printer, maybe 5 pages or something, put them in baggies, and Bill would take them on the road and sell them, 10 here, 20 here. That was how things started.
So when you started out, how old were you?
I was in my mid-20s, a couple of years out of college.
Did you raise any venture capital? Did you go to an incubator school? Did somebody tell you what all the
we
things
didn't
you need
need
to do to
no,
be
we didn't
successful?
need no stinking venture capital. No, it was, we bought our own baggies and our own floppy disks, and we kind of, bank with the games we would sell, we'd buy some more supplies, and neither one of us were salaried. I was still working at, we were both working at General Instrument. I was still working my regular job, and Bill was still working his regular job. So we had very, very low expenses. Bill's wife was our human resources person, and it was a very, very much a seat of the pants operation.
But Sid, uh, fast forward just a couple of years, because I joined in 1989. I joined Microprose in 1989. Wow. You guys were kicking it, to be able to bring in a director of marketing and the office space there in Hunt Valley, and just, it was amazing, really amazing.
It was a very incremental process. First, I went part-time so I could spend more time making games, and Bill was doing a lot of stuff in evenings and weekends, or when he was supposed to be working. And eventually, we a lot of my friends from work were doing conversions to different systems. Bill eventually came full-time. Like I said, his wife was part of the company. Kind of one at a time, we found folks to work with us, but it was it was kind of just one step at a time. We were making it up basically as we went along, as the entire industry was. I think of it as like the Wild West days, that we had no idea what the future held in store. If you had told me at that time that 20 years later we'd have this huge industry, I would have said that's possible, but it's also possible that this is just a fad and it'll go away. So we just kind of took it one step at a time, and this is where we ended up.
So your first few games were all flight simulators, and when I think of flight simulators, there's all sorts of calculations and 3D physics you have to render. What were some of the limitations you had to struggle with the hardware at that time period?
Just about everything. We had our sounds were 3 channels of beeps and boops. We started off with 24K of memory to put our games in, and basically a lot of our early games were based on kind of hardware tricks that we discovered, little tricks that we discovered to make the computer appear to be more powerful than it actually was. And then we would kind of build a game around it. F-15, I learned how to do 3D geometry and draw lines in 3D. So this certain set of lines was an airplane, this certain set of lines was an airport, this certain set of lines was this, and by kind of moving them in a way that felt authentic and making the right sounds at the right time, we kind of discovered the secret, which was to make the game happen in the player's imagination. We couldn't put enough information, graphic fidelity, sound authenticity on the screen to make the game real. But if we gave the player enough to believe it was real and it happened in their imagination, then the magic started to happen. So I think we realized from a very early time that it was the gameplay, it was the decisions the player was making, the way that the player was kind of imagining what was happening, that really made the game come to life.
And how much help did you have? And I'm going to say help in quotes, maybe from, I don't know, Area 51 for like the design of the F-19 stealth game.
Well, F-19 was an interesting example because there had been rumors about a stealth fighter. There had been, talk in the press and Bill kind of being plugged into Air Force sources, kind of suspected something was coming along, but we wanted to, we were going to jump the gun. We were going to bring out a product, that before the Air Force finished their plane, we were going to have our game out there. And we speculated that it would be called F-19 because I think that was the next one in order or something like that. And it kind of had this new dimension of gameplay, which was stealth. I mean, a lot of games in those days were very, blow as much up as you can, as quickly as you can, and stealth kind of gave us an opportunity to try some different kinds of gameplay. Worrying about your radar signature and things like that. So we brought out the game. It was actually really well received. But very shortly after that, the Air Force brought out the real stealth fighter, which was not called F-19. It was called F-117A, and it was not as much fun as the plane that we had created for our game. It didn't have any guns on it. It basically took stealth to heart and kind of just snuck around and tried not to be seen and not to do anything or not to bother anybody till it blew something up and then snuck away again. That would have made a pretty boring game. So our game, our F-19 was a much more fun.
Yeah, and your design was
very
very similar to the design that Tom Clancy had in Red Storm Rising, much more of a smooth, fun to fly combat aircraft versus the wobbly Goblin. So that's fun stuff.
Yeah, that was a lesson we learned early, is that we had actually been approached by the military to do something in a simulation line, or could these games be used for training and things like that? And our answer was basically not really, because we are trying to make these games fun, make them exciting, not necessarily realistic. And their goals would have been different from ours. So that synergy really didn't materialize.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. So whether you're writing software for finding Russian hackers who are doing SolarWinds stuff, or making a better spreadsheet, or making a game that's fun, and you've said that the thing you're doing should focus on the fun. What do you mean by that?
Well, fun kind of solves every other problem that a game might have. I mean, once the player is having fun, again, their imagination is engaged. They're making those decisions. They're kind of thinking into the future. If I do this, this is going to happen. If I do this, this might work. They're not going to be complaining about how many pixels you have on the screen, or that sound doesn't sound exactly right, or they're going to forgive a lot of potential failings if they're having fun. If they're not having fun, they're going to be very, they're going to blame it on where the graphics are. They're going to start looking for reasons to not like your game. So I think that's the basis of it. That fun is kind of the uniqueness, the unique thing that games can bring is that engagement of the player.
Ron, that was just the mantra of Microprose. It's what everybody knew. It's how we operated. If it wasn't fun, forget it. And so that was really ingrained in all of us at every level. It was about the fun.
Yeah, when we were not going to be as visually awesome as a movie, or we didn't have the fidelity of a CD, or we didn't have the star power of a TV show. But the one thing that we did have that was unique versus all these other forms of entertainment was this engagement with the player, this making the player the star is the way we referred to it. It's about making the player the star, letting them make the important decisions and feel that they control the way the story unfolds.
So around this time, how large was your development and testing team?
Laughably small. Many of the early games, probably the first 5 or 6 games that I did, I was it. I was the artist. I was the sound designer.
Mhm.
I was the programmer. I was. Eventually, we got an actual artist. I remember for Silent Service, and lo and behold, he did better art than I did, so he was hired. Um, uh, Testing was done by our friends. So it started at one. Now over time, like I say, we hired folks to do art, eventually sound, testing, things like that. But it was,
And then a marketing department, which
and
was
then
really,
eventually we had
and
to get
then
hard.
eventually,
I was against it, I was totally against it, but Bill convinced me that it was a good idea.
And this was well before. I don't want to make it sound like it was that far in the past, but before, the cloud, before waterfall development, before agile and retrospectives. You just kind of did it all. I'm going to say by love and brute force.
Yes, yeah. To be honest with you, the producer was kind of the last person added to the team as we evolved, and that was really a side effect of the size of the teams growing, the complexity of projects growing, things like that. I mean, it was very. I mean, we did games in months. We completed them in a few months, whereas today it takes years. I mean, the scale of things is incredibly different, from where it was back then. Not, in terms of the power of computers, obviously, but also in terms of the size of teams and the complexity of games. Although a lot of the fundamentals still that we learned back then still apply, which is kind of the good news.
When you were coming up with your next series of games, I believe it was Robin Williams who suggested that you put your name on them. And this is something I think no matter what kind of software you're working on, if you're working with a team, people are sometimes afraid to kind of put their names on things today. What was that story like? How do you think that helped you?
Well, there are a number of variations on that story. The Robin Williams story is Bill's take on it, and I have no reason to doubt anything Bill would ever say. But yeah, his story is that he was at a function with Robin Williams, and I think he was asked, why don't you put the designer's name on a game? It's an art form like any other, and Bill said, yeah, that sounds great. As I remember it, I was working on a game called Pirates, and it was very different. As you had mentioned earlier, we had done a number of flight simulation games. We were known for our military games, Silent Service as well, and F-19. And I got this idea that I wanted to do a game about pirates because pirates are cool. And Bill, we had a talk, and Bill said, Sid, don't do that silly pirates game. We need more airplane games. And I said, no, well, Bill, no, I want to do this pirates game. I think it's going to be cool. He said, okay, but we're going to put your name on it, so that if if it tanks, no,
it's you.
it's on you. But if they liked your other games, maybe even though it's not a flight simulator or a military game, they'll give it a try because it has your name on it. And then Pirates actually did pretty well. So once something works, we keep doing it.
Well, the next one that came along was Civilization, and it was Sid Meier's Civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
That did good. So
that did really well.
It's still doing well. My younger son has a poster of it in his room, so that one's really lasting.
Well, I will. The only thing I'll take credit for is I'll take credit for the cover artwork, because when you were coming up with Civilization, it was my job to, what was the box going to look like? What was the art going to look like? And I was online and I was searching for stuff, and that picture came up and I was like, that's it. And so I don't even think it was $500 to use that, and it was great.
Probably double the sales of the game. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So
And I really
good
appreciate
job.
both of you sharing these stories, because there's so many people who are entrepreneurs and starting, and they think that they have to have all the answers. They can't be opportunistic. But the reality is great companies all start by these small moves that have big effects.
Yeah, we're actually at a time in the kind of video game world where there's a place for startups, for indie games. There are markets, the Apple Store, places like that, that didn't exist before. So you don't need to have a cast of thousands to create a game these days and get it into the marketplace. And there are
Well,
tools
and
like
you're
Unreal.
absolutely right, because as you said, and I say this about a lot of our technology companies, but back in the day, you needed that big computer. You had to be hardwired. You had to have a landline in order to do business. And now you really just need your iPhone, you know? And so it does give the opportunity for some folks to think through indie games and getting them out there. Very different time.
So with Civilization, you had all this experience with flight simulators, and you had done pirates and a couple other different genres, but Civilization was such a brand new type of user experience and very engagement. Were you worried about people understanding? Like, would it be fun? Like, what was your inspiration behind all that?
Well, basically, we wrote games that we wanted to play. I think we didn't have, market research and focus groups and things like that to tell us what kind of games we should be making. So it was a game. It was a game we wanted to play. There were quite a few people at that time at Microprose that had come from the board gaming industry. Um, Avalon Hill was a Baltimore company, et cetera. So we had some. That was kind of where some of the game design talent was coming from. We had done Railroad Tycoon, which was our first God game, and it had done pretty well. So we kind of wanted to look for something even godlier to tackle, and the history of civilization seemed like it could could be an interesting challenge. I think the games have to be kind of fun to make and challenging and new to kind of keep that the interest and the enthusiasm going. So it fit a number of those criteria, that it seemed like a cool challenge, building on something that we had done before, but also breaking some new ground. But every game was a gamble. Basically, we did not just make the same game over and over again. So we had no assurance that Civilization was going to be successful. In fact, strategy was kind of a dirty word in those days. That strategy games were like boring and only for nerds and things like that. So we kind of believe that we made the world safe for strategy games, because after that everything was turn-based strategy, real-time strategy. Everything turned into a strategy game.
And Bill was very, very initially not into it. He was still into, the military and the flight sims and Hunt for Red October. We actually had an opportunity to do Hunt for Red October.
Right.
Yeah.
Fortunately, at that time, we had a number of development groups, teams within the company, so he could talk to Scott Svanberg and say, let's make this military game. I wasn't the only designer developer in the company, so he could go talk to somebody else while I was making Civilization.
Doing the things you wanted to do.
So if I would say something like F-15 Strike Eagle made being a fighter bomber pilot, fun, would Civilization make a historian be fun? Like what's the fun part of Civilization, do you think?
Well, I think it's one is kind of the fantasy of controlling this sandbox world. I think that's kind of the fun. The first thing you see as you go into the game is a little group of settlers looking for a place, looking for a home, and you found a city, and then they start to grow, and you decide what to build there, what sort of buildings to build, what sort of units to build, where to explore. It's a world that you control, And it's a world that makes sense, and a world that responds to your good choices or your bad choices. And you know intuitively that no one has ever played this specific game in this specific way again. So the story that you create as you traverse 6,000 years of history is unique to you. And you can look back and, at the end of the game here, you've got this sprawling world that you've created. And there's that the little city that started it all. And there's that continent that you discovered halfway through. And there's that guy, Genghis Khan, who gave you a hard time. But you overcame that. So you've created this story that is uniquely yours. And then you can go back and do it again. And that's
But
really
Ron, I think it's very much like, I don't know when you grew up, but movies and television actually were pretty informative in some history. They really were, you learned a lot. Now, it might not have been 100% true, and, it might have been a little
You learned a lot. It might not have been true, but you learned a lot.
But, think it through. The first time you saw Ben-Hur, right?
Mhm.
Did you actually really know all that stuff happened? Not really. So I think the games serve the same purpose in many ways. In order to get through civilization, you have to have some sense of history.
Yeah, the game rewarded you for knowing things like, gunpowder. Hey, that could come in handy. I'm gonna research that. Or electricity. Or there's Napoleon. I've heard of him. There's Genghis Khan. I better watch out for it. So it kind of rewarded you for what you knew. It didn't ask you to learn a bunch of new stuff. It kind of traded in what the knowledge that you already had and rewarded you for having that knowledge. One of the things we said around the company was that we do our research in the children's section of the library, when there used to be libraries, and because we want to kind of build upon that common knowledge that everybody feels at home, because these are concepts that they already know. They don't need to read the manual to decide how to play. They don't need to learn how things work in the far distant future. They can use concepts, ideas that they're already familiar with. And again, that allows their imagination to take hold and project how the game is going to go into the future. So that was kind of one of the secrets, I think, of many of our games, is they're based on things people already know, whether it's pirates. They're based on Errol Flynn movies and the fantasy about pirates. Airplanes, if you stepped into an F-15 fighter and pressed the wrong button, you'd probably explode. But our F-15s are very easy to fly. So it's making the player the star, empowering them to create stories that they can kind of look back upon and enjoy.
So let's talk a little bit about computer security. So without me leading you down any different roles or roads here, why are there no really good computer security games out there?
Actually, there's a game, Netrunner, I think, that is a fairly decent. I know it's a card game. It might also be a computer game. At the risk of stepping on some toes, it's not something a lot of people aspire to. For example, when I say pirates or fighter pilot or despotic ruler of the world, a lot of people say, yeah, sign me up for that. It's a computer security expert. Not as exciting. But it's also my contention that anything can be turned into a game. So I think the possibility probably is there.
We have to make it fun. I definitely agree. Folks who are in cybersecurity tend to think it's like another dimension and this amazingly complex and very rewarding career protecting people's data. But as soon as you step out of that, you realize that the general public has very little understanding of what the difference between an incident response, a compliance officer, a penetration tester, malware engineer, all these different kind of things. So, and Hollywood's really kind of done us a disservice, right? There's always scenes where the hacker is got 12 screens and there's stars flying everywhere and they're wearing a hoodie and drinking Red Bull. Some of the best hackers in the world I know before COVID, wore suits, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
But Sid, if you could make a game of it by saying you're looking for the bad guy, right? Looking for the hacker and looking for the bad guy, I think that would be really interesting, to have a sense of, this is what it takes to be the bad guy and play it as the good guy,
Yeah. Yeah, you again, kind of going back to that idea of trying to build upon what people already know or their assumptions about, this field. I think you mentioned how Hollywood has a certain vision and reality has a different vision, and how do you kind of bridge that gap? That would be interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned Netrunner, though, because a lot of people will associate computer security, how you hack. I'm going to use a buffer overflow attack to break into the system, and maybe the system has some sort of intrusion prevention endpoint, host protection system, and we have all sorts of fancy names for these different things, but it's really not much difference than Harry Potter and magic. And it's no sort of coincidence that Netrunner was based on magic. So I think it's a really, really good analogy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's kind of tough is that if you go to something like a capture the flag, where you literally set up target computers and you have competing schools, and we're trying to get more women and minorities into these things. It's okay, we're going to hack, we're going to do this, and there's faces stuff. It's really boring. If you just visually look at it, it's people touching on the keyboard. It's hushed voices, every now and then you'll see a high five, but it's not like a football game. It's not like a debate where you can see interaction and stuff. So I think the industry's always had a hard time kind of projecting itself into something interesting like a video game.
I would agree.
So with the games that you've developed,
but if we go back to, I didn't mean to cut
yeah.
you off, Ron, but if we go back
it.
to where you started the story today, you hacked those games, right, Sid? You wanted to make a game and you figured it out. You hacked that game in order to make your own.
Yeah, we did a game called Covert Action back in the day, which was probably the closest to the type of thing that we're talking about, trying to identify gameable aspects of it. And we had, puzzles kind of come to mind. A game that's kind of puzzle based could fit in this space. We had a code breaking section and a circuit that you had to figure out how to apply the and and ors to kind of get the right output from the circuit. And so there are, but that was kind of wrapped into international intrigue, mystery, and things like that. So kind of finding, even though we try to be innovative, there are genres, there are conventions that whether it's puzzle or a platformer, or what that if people see something like that, they kind of say, okay, I know I'm going to be comfortable in that world. And then the puzzles apply to the world of cybersecurity or something like that. But that could be one avenue to kind of break the different tasks, the different objectives into puzzle type mini games, and then tie them together, with your kind of capture the flag or your some meta structure that ties them all together.
How about cybersecurity in the games you developed? Did you ever have anybody attack your copy protection or actually steal source code or anything like that?
Well, breaking copy protection is a time-honored tradition in the computer gaming industry. We've gone through a number of generations of copy protection. Bad sectors written on the disk. We came up with what we thought was a very clever system in the Microprose days of putting information in the manual that the player would have to input to be able to play the game. so that would require them having the manual at least. And then we softened that a bit by making it information that once you played a number of times, you would already know. So you wouldn't have to always go to the manual, but if you were just playing it for the first time, you couldn't play unless you had the manual or a copy of the manual or something similar. There was kind of a arms race between copy protection technology and copy cracking technology that kind of has existed since the the beginning of computer games. Now with the internet and things like that, that has kind of become the magic bullet as far as copy protection.
Yeah, if my game is stored in the cloud somewhere, then it's pretty hard for me to hack that versus trying to control software I've got access to. So I've spoken to a number of people who are doing licensing in the cloud, and I'm like, you have no idea what it was like when we tried to sell something on-prem. And that's what we call for stuff that's deployed on servers and whatnot. So I think that's a really interesting point. How about just actual like theft of intellectual property? Have you ever had any other countries just blatantly copy your game, whether it was actual stealing of source code or just stealing of ideas and re-implementing it in their own systems?
That is called inspiration. A fair amount of Civilization was inspired by SimCity, for example. We think we added a little more to it. There was an actual board game called Civilization. So in terms of building upon the ideas, that have already been implemented, that's kind of one of the reasons that this industry has grown, is that we've we've established conventions about the left joystick always moves your guy and the right joystick makes you turn, makes you look. By stealing that, you've made the game more accessible to the player. So there are many conventions, that if you take a very, very broad definition of stealing, are stolen, but they are done in the interest of the player. On the other hand, exactly copying a game or a that's not and stealing source. Nobody could read my source code anyway, so nobody's going to steal my source code. That kind of stuff, really, industrial espionage, that kind of stuff. We haven't really experienced a lot of that. I think for two reasons. One is the kind of half-life of a game is pretty short. So these are not, this isn't a game that it'd be worth copying, other than in the first month or two of its existence, because that's when it's popular, that's when it sells. So games come and go. There's so many games out there that there's not I think all that much of an incentive to steal things. And I think
there also is a way too, because it happened with me and a couple of the game companies. I didn't mean to cut you off, but like Tropico, it goes out there on the open market, and a game company can agree to do Tropico 3, the third version of it, or another game company will come along and say, no, I'll do Tropico 4. So they kind of put them out there in the space, hoping to get, the next generation.
Yeah, I think it's also inherent in video game people that they don't want to make the same game. They want to make a better game. Every video game player is also a designer. They're playing the game, but in the back of their mind, it's like, this is how I would have done that. I would have done that better. This should change. They should fix this. So copying another game is not really that exciting. It's making a better one, taking maybe an inspiration or some ideas, but making your game even better than something that's already out there.
So let's close out with some advice to anybody who's starting a business where they're going to do software programming, whether it's medical industry, video games, cybersecurity. What kind of advice do you have for people who might be in college right now, or just get starting at some sort of software program company?
Well, specifically as far as games, there's a couple pieces of advice that we kind of we've been asked this question before. that we think is important. One is to bring something fresh, something new. A lot of people kind of want to combine their two favorite games. I want to combine Minecraft and Halo into a new game. It's not really a new game. What is your passion? What is your interest? Is it history? Is it medicine? Is it space? Bring something from outside of kind of the set of games that have already been made. Bring something unique to what we have, because we don't need Minecraft and Halo necessarily combined together. There. And the other thing that we talk about is if you're a game designer, then you should make games. It's not about conceptualizing what the game should be, or describing how the cinematics are going to work. What is the gameplay? What are the decisions? What does the player do, and why is that fun? Not only describe that, but program it. There's Unity, there's Unreal, there are tools out there these days that allow you to make games. It probably is not going to look as good as everything as a AAA title, but there's no excuse for not actually making a game and playing it and seeing whether your idea is fun.
And Ron, one thing that I would say, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you have to follow the path of Sid and realize that he knew what he was good at, but his partner, Bill, knew what he was good at. And together, that allowed Sid to concentrate on what he was good at, which is the game design, creating the games, the programming, and it gave him the opportunity with the partner to run the operations and to do the sales and the business development. And so as you think about that, understand that there's going to come a point in time when, if you start this game company, you're passionate about the design and the development, who's actually going to be out there finding you customers and running your operations?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, without Bill Staley, nothing would have happened. So you kind of, I guess, understand your talents, but also understand your limitations, and find somebody who can cover for you.
So specifically for the video game, entrepreneurs out there, how do you feel about being an independent software distributor or getting on platforms like Steam?
Steam is definitely the place to be these days in the PC world. A lot of things have gotten much easier than they used to be. Distribution, kind of getting your game out there. Between the development platforms and places like Steam and the different stores. There's a lot of places for your game to get exposure pretty much seamlessly. I mean, you don't have to drive to every mom and pop store or buy an ad in Compute magazine. However, the downside is that everybody else can do that as well. So you're competing in a much more competitive market of games. So it becomes even more important to kind of find that uniqueness, what makes your game different from what else is out there. And finding that viral thing that, however it happens, gets your game noticed. So it's a different set of challenges, honestly, than we faced when we started.
Awesome. Deb, do you have a final question for Sid?
Oh gosh. I think it would just be, would you have done anything different?
I have absolutely no complaints. I've been able to do what I love doing for a very long time. So to nitpick about this little thing or that little thing along the way would be very ungrateful. So no, I've been so fortunate to be able to make games and work with some extremely talented people. In an industry that's pretty volatile, we've been able to continue to do what we love to do for for many years. So I don't, I don't think I would do anything different.
And you need to really pat yourself on the back and give yourself credit for growing the gaming industry right here in Baltimore. At one point, we were the third largest gaming cluster in the country, and all as a result of you.
You're welcome.
Well said. Well said. Well, Sid, I want to thank you for not only coming on the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction show, but also I played all the fighter pilot games and I went into the Air Force to fly. And I think playing Civilization really allowed me to kind of think abstractly and plan down the road. And then finally, when I started a couple cybersecurity companies, I kind of knowing your story and how small of a team that you had to kind of do that kind of, really inspired me that, I could probably do something similar. So I hope everybody who's watching today, really enjoyed this and learned a lot. Sid, where can people go to learn more about what you're doing today?
Well, Firaxis has a website that kind of covers what we're doing today, what we're thinking about doing in the future. I just happen to have a book published. My memoir kind of tells a lot of the behind the scenes stories of games like Civilization and Pirates and Silent Service, etc. And play the games. That's really the best way to get an insight into what we're doing, is to give those games a try.
That's excellent. All right. Well, Deb and Sid, thank you very much for coming on the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction show. And I hope everybody enjoys this, and we'll put this in the show notes. Thank you very much for watching.